So I grew up with your image on the wall of my basement. My father had, no, it's really interesting. So where he started building the instruments, he later took them out, went to the factory, and then there was a room that was sort of my music den. All my friends would come over, and there would be posters on the wall, and there would be Pete Townsend and Herbie Hancock and Billy Preston and all these, images on the wall. And uh, it was how I grew up.
Mm.
Growing up with ARP, my upbringing was really intrinsically connected with ARP synthesizers because I was 7 years old when the first synths were shipping. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah, and I feel like I've been waiting to speak to you for so long. So I really, so first of all, I really want to thank you for taking the time. I mean, I'm sure you're incredibly busy. You're gigging all the time, which is so incredible. And just amazing, amazing. Seems like nonstop.
But I did stop for 2 years because of COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, God, the big stop.
Yeah, couldn't work.
That must have
And
been,
that was, I had to think about a lot of things then.
yeah,
And people were asking me, don't you miss being on the road and all that? But I had I already considered that. And I'm sure because of my Buddhist practice, my thinking was, how can I turn this into a benefit in some way? So
hmm,
I thought I could either think about what I can't do or what I can do. I was able to sleep in my own bed every night for 2 years. I haven't done that since I was in my 20s, since I first played the ARP Odyssey, because
wow,
during the year, I was always traveling somewhere,
yeah.
either with Miles Davis's band or with my own bands. And this was 2 years. Wow, that was a benefit. And I had time to study things that I usually don't have enough time to study and to delve into it. But
I
anyway, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
appreciate that. And I was saying to my husband recently, as horrible as so much of the pandemic was, it felt like it was the first time I had stopped in my adult life, really.
Hmm.
Sort of stopped and paused and got reacquainted with books and things and things that were meaningful to me. There's a lot of painting in my family, a lot of artwork, and my father had passed
Great.
away the year before, and I've been going through his things, you know, and I don't know if I would have had the time or the focus to do that if I was still going on, through my day job, going there regularly and all, and it's an interesting pause. The whole world was on pause in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but you turned it into a benefit, which is what we're supposed to do. You know,
Yeah.
that's that's the best thing we can do. We can
Yeah,
learn something from, you know.
and still learning. And still learning. I
Yeah,
feel like we're just in another phase, but it's not the same as it was and may never be. So
guess
anyway,
what? It's the 21st century. Nothing is the same as it was.
and it's not
Synthesizers
pleasant.
aren't right, right. I mean, synthesizers aren't the same as they were, right?
No, not at
I
all.
mean, it's the technological age, the industrial age. That one is over. It's a new age. And we weren't really prepared for it. But it's hard to prepare for something that hasn't happened, and when you don't know how it's going to evolve.
having tools that you're not prepared for is an interesting dilemma. I've always thought about it's like being a teenager. You have a man's or a woman's body, but you have not had that experience in life where you can go out and know what to do with that type of, physicality and intellectualism. And it's an interesting dilemma. And I always thought about the 20th century was like that. It was like civilization in their adolescence, nuclear weapons, all this stuff. And how do we handle all that?
The future is in peril, and it's difficult to project how things are going to turn out. But we human beings need to get our act together,
Big time.
and not be so selfish and, you know, only thinking about me, me, me. It's we're all one big family, and COVID wants to kill that family.
Yeah, it's daunting. I'm going to jump to one of the
Yeah, go ahead.
further questions because it kind of relates to what we were saying.
Uh,
Other than the fact that I've been listening to your music. By the way, out of all of the contemporary musicians and artists that played ARPs, the only one I ever heard, or two, because it was two of your albums that I ever heard my father play, was Headhunters and Thrust. He was a classical
well,
pianist, and he was not really into rock and roll,
uh,
which is, there's an irony in that, of course, considering, the range of music that's been used with his synthesizers and is continuing. But he really, really loved your albums, and so I was introduced to them. I think I was 11 when Headhunters came out, and I remember
wow.
hearing it around the house, and that's real. I was, think reflecting back on that, and I was wondering if there was some kind of synchronicity with having a classical background that made him connect with the music.
Well, actually, for me, it's because I'm a nerd. I'm totally into technology. And the other thing, because I had like a more avant-garde band when I first started using uh synths. It was
Mwandishi
before Headhunters with a band that we now call Mwandishi Band,
Yeah.
right? I did a record called Crossings, and I didn't play synthesizers, but my manager told me that I was trying to figure out how can I get more people to listen to the stuff we're doing, and because it was pretty out there and pretty ethereal and spacey, right?
Hmm.
And so my manager says, "Well, there's this new thing that's out called sizer, and maybe if you put a synthesizer on one of your pieces, it might draw some attention to it because it's being used in rock and roll, which was the popular music of that time, right?"
Uh-huh.
And so, and he said, "I know a guy, a synthesizer player, and he's got his own studio, but it's like a mile away from this studio, what that we were in." And so what I said was, okay, I don't know anything about synthesizers, but let him do something like an intro for one of the pieces. And then if I like it, I'll use it. If I don't like it, I won't use it. And if he's okay with that, okay, let's do it. Okay, he agreed to it. That was Patrick Gleason
Yeah.
was the guy, right?
Yeah.
And he had his own studio called Different Fur up in San Francisco. We were recording in San Francisco. That's where my manager lived and had his studio. Anyway, when it came back, I listened to it and it blew my mind. I loved it. As a matter of fact, right after that, I hired Patrick Gleason to go on the road with me with the Mwandishi band, right?
So it was Patrick that started that ball rolling more or less.
Yeah, he,
Yeah.
he was the guy that started the ball rolling. And but the thing is, because I'm a very curious person anyway, I was always asking them questions about what is this, and I found out that the language, some of the language, I understood. I knew what amp was. I mean, I knew what that was, right? And amplifier, and I knew because I was an engineering major at first in college.
I saw that. I was so surprised, but I shouldn't be. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because I mean, it's that curiosity that made me interested in how things work, you know. So I mean, when I was young, when I was a kid, it was mechanical things, and I was taking you know clocks apart and trying to put them back together. I mean, when I was a preteen, I was trying to do stuff like that.
Hmm.
Anyway, my first major was engineering, and after like 2 years, I changed it to music because I was spending more time with music and learning jazz, and that was what that was about. But this renewed two things that I was interested in. One is classical music. One was uh, tech stuff, right? And scientific stuff. So um, it immediately drew my attention, and I was always asking Patrick Gleason, "What does this do, and what does that do?" And so he was trying to teach me. Eventually, when I did Headhunters, that was the first time that I actually played synthesizers myself.
Hmm.
And ARP Odyssey was like one of the first. I had ARP Odyssey, and I had Mini Moog. And but one thing you don't know is that on Chameleon, originally I recorded the bass line either on the Mini Moog or the ARP Odyssey. I'm not sure. I think I may have done it on the Mini Moog. But then when I heard the playback, I thought, hmm, I need to make the notes shorter. So I recorded on a different track, and I used the ARP Odyssey. I changed the sound a little bit. And anyway, what wound up happening is we actually recorded those over at Patrick Gleason's studio. And when I took it back to David Rubinson's studio, he put up all the faders, and and so he had both bass tracks playing,
Oh,
the original one and the one with the Harp Odyssey. I think I remember this correctly. I could be wrong about some of this, right? Because that was a long time ago, right? So anyway, but the main point uh, was not the fact that I used two different synthesizers, although that was part of what I learned from doing this. I had heard that, and I guess I knew from my science background that low frequency sounds don't have location. You can't tell where below a certain frequency a certain sound is coming from. So there's no stereo bass. There wasn't back then,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But I said to the engineer there, Fred Cotero, who just recently passed away, by the way, just a week and a half ago.
Okay.
Anyway, I said, well, what if they're both two different bass sounds? Would that make a difference? He said, yeah. The problem is we didn't have any more tracks on the 16 track recorder. That's the largest one they had then.
Right. Used up all the tracks.
And then we had another uh like a 8 track or something. And we actually synced them together to and I had the bass part on on one of one on each of the of those recorders, right?
Oh, wow.
So when they played, they synced them up and played them back. And I said, why don't you put one on the left and one on the right? And and they're thinking, oh, this is not going to work. It worked. It was stereo bass
Oh,
because the
wow.
sounds were different, right?
I'm gonna have
One
to
was an
listen to
ARP.
it through a headset. I don't.
Well, the problem is we had no way of storing it on a single tape recorder. So I had to get rid of one of them.
Oh.
Well, actually, later on, after the record was out, 24 track recorders were on the market. And we actually did transfer it. If I remember correctly, we transferred it to the 24 track recorder, but the record was already out.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
But it worked.
It's amazing the way people made mods back then with having the limitations, not having polyphony, not having all the more than the tracks that you had. I find a lot of those stories really fascinating because today it seems like there's so many tools available, but the idea that limitations lead to invention and lead to interesting discoveries, I think is one of the most fascinating things about the creative process. And that's,
Oh yeah, it is.
yeah,
I,
yeah, I love that.
I, I mean, that reminds me that when I first started recording with different people as a sideman, um, they had just transitioned from 8 track being the most that could be done
16.
to 16 track. It's that was a long time ago.
It's interesting though being part of the history. I mean, it must be just such a rich set of memories, seeing the progression that we've
Oh
had.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel blessed in that way to have been, you know, been a witness to a lot of this. It's been a real blessing, and I mean, things were. It seems like at that time things were really opening up for you too. I mean, I read that you found or were introduced to Buddhism in 1972. Is that about the right time?
Yes.
And then,
They like during yeah, so this was all during the same time.
and the Odyssey actually, this is the 50th anniversary, so it was launched in 1972. And there you are, you're developing this new sound and you have new instruments to play with. The world must have been opening up for you in an enormous way. What was it, what was that like? What was that like?
For a nerd, it was very exciting.
My favorite
But
people were nerds. My dad was a self-professed nerd. That's what he called himself. Yeah, yeah.
but there were a lot of other things happening at the same time too, with human rights, civil rights, and all of those things. So everything wasn't this wonderful. But we had some, you know, great leaders that were trying to move things forward, you know. So I mean the world is a complete world. It wasn't just I didn't just have my head in the sand, you know, looking at keyboards. I mean, that was one of the reasons I adopted the name Mwandishi because it's a Swahili word uh, that means writer. You know? And everybody in the band took that on, and we used to wear dashikis, with all kinds of African styles and many things to, kind of identify ourselves with the, civil rights fight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all that was happening at the same time that I'm making these records and being turned on to the ARP Odyssey, and other art products for the first time. The cool
You,
thing about the Odyssey is you could actually play two notes.
yes, polyphonic. Yeah, yeah.
And they weren't polyphonic yet.
Not yet, but there's always that ways of doing interesting tunings with the oscillators that you can get more sounds than.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
So there was those possibilities as well.
right.
And I remember as a child being very frustrated with the modulars and semi-modulars, but I had a great time with the pro soloist and the string ensemble because they had instant gratification. Uh, as- and I pressed the note, there's an oboe and everything like that. You used the pro soloist and the string ensemble, right? Am I right? Did you use
uh, yeah, I used string ensemble on some things. And what was the other one you said?
the pro soloist?
Pro soloist. Wow, I'd completely forgotten about that.
You used our products a lot, and I remember, the ads and the arpeggios, the newsletter that had images of you and all. Did you have any contact or relationships with anybody in the company? Did you ever meet my dad?
Yeah, yes, I did because I actually went to the factory in Massachusetts,
You did in Newton.
in Newton. Yeah, right. I went to Newton and I met your dad, and his partner, and
David Friend, probably.
David. Yeah, and we talked for quite some time, and they showed me what they were doing. They were quite friendly, and I really enjoyed myself. And I wasn't making very much money at the time, and I was hoping that I would be able to uh, kind of be in their favor in a sense, and maybe they could even give me a reduced price, or maybe they'll provide me with one. And they really helped me out a
Oh,
lot,
good. Oh, good. Oh, good. Oh,
or
good.
else I wouldn't have been able to use their products because I couldn't afford it. I had a sextet.
Yeah. There's
I
a
forget
lot of
the
people have to get
conditions.
paid at the end of the night on a sextet. My husband is a musician, so
Oh, I see.
yeah, yeah, I'm familiar with what happens when the larger the band, the smaller the take home at the end of the night. So,
And I was playing jazz clubs,
yeah.
so those are not 1,000 seat venues. No, not even 100 seats. Maybe you get 80 people or 60, depending on the club. So I was constantly kind of losing money. The band was not making money; it was spending money. So it wasn't that easy at the time. Fortunately, I had the song "Watermelon Man" uh, had been a very popular song, and I was the writer and the publisher, so I had income from that. That's what was sustaining me.
Hmm. So one of the fascinating threads that's been running through some of the interviews that I've been doing with synthesizer players, and ironically, a lot with Odyssey players, is going back to classical training and classical upbringing. Um,
Mm.
I was fascinated to hear that and then to hear from you again. How do you feel that has influenced your work at this point? I know that in the beginning you went into jazz and you were with Miles. I don't know if you call it straight ahead jazz, but what happened
Hmm.
between the sextet and then what happened later with Mwandishi and the Headhunters, I mean, it is a huge leap. But with this lifetime of career, including scoring and things like that, do you feel that you go back to classical again and again? Is that intrinsically part of you?
Well, it is because I already had a sense of an orchestra, right? And I tried to use your father's products uh, with kind of an orchestral sensibility. Knowing full well at that time they were only monophonic, only could basically play one note at a time. You couldn't play chords. So I had to pick and choose which notes I would have. And the tracks, you could only put one sound. You only had a limited number of tracks to put the sounds on. So, but in my head, I was thinking, yes, piano has one sound, but if I want to, suppose I want a violin section, how could I do that? There's
Mhm.
no way to get a violin section, but maybe I could get a violin sound and then combine that with a French horn sound or something that simulates that. And it gave me the opportunity to make some constructions that came off of my uh, my classical experience listening to orchestrations. And later on, that kind of added to uh, the few film scores that I did where we used orchestra. The one that I received an Oscar for around midnight, there was no place uh, because of the story of the film. It was about music in a jazz club, so there was no real place for orchestrations. Very little, limited
Mhm.
space for that to stay true to the story. But there were some in the beginning that were not the very beginning, but by the time I did a film called Death Wish, it was the Death Wish #1, and Jeff Goldblum was in that. That
Yes.
was one of his first films.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I'll have to.
He played the really bad teenager that three teenagers raped this mother and daughter in
Right.
the
I
beginning
remember
of the film.
the movie vaguely. But I was a little, yeah. Huh. Jeff Goldblum.
And he is a wonderful piano player, by the way.
Really?
He's he's a jazz player. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm. I know
yeah.
some other.
Nice, really nice guy too. Yeah, I met him a few times.
I always got a good vibe from him when I heard him speak. In an award ceremony or a interview or something like that. He seemed like a
Yeah,
nice guy.
he's got a lot of
Yes,
heart. Yeah,
a lot of adventures with doing soundtracks. Interesting. Um,
yeah. But I mean, that was the main thing. It's the colors of the instruments. That's that's what I kind of connected synthesizers with the colors of the orchestral instruments in classical music, because there wasn't a lot of orchestral sounds in jazz. That was been is more associated with classical music. A lot of the harmonies that I choose from the influence of Ravel, and some other choices that I make too are from influence of Stravinsky, for example.
mm.
Yeah, and I played a lot of Mozart when I was a kid, but I don't think it affected me that much with stuff I did with synthesizers.
Mozart's complicated. Yeah, I still tool around on a piano a little bit. My dad's piano.
Oh, great,
Yeah, I have his piano
great.
here, which is really lovely. Um, let's go back
Now
to
Chopin, that's different. Chopin,
Chopin. Oh,
oh yeah, I
oh,
mean it's beautiful on the piano,
yeah.
but I mean it makes the piano sound like an orchestra. You know, yeah, I love Chopin. Anyway. Oh, anyway, I'm getting away from the topic.
No, no, that's okay. That's okay. Chopin is big in my family. My father played it a lot, and the last time my mother and I saw music together, heard music together, it was Chopin, and I,
Great.
we were both crying because it reminded us of my father. It was,
Oh, right, right.
yeah, it was poignant. It was something. Yeah, I think you would have. I'm glad that you got to speak with him. He was often shy, but when he
Mhm.
was speaking about something that he loved, he would be absolutely effusive. He was, just really loved to connect about stuff that he had passion for, and that makes me really happy. That's great to know.
As a matter of fact, it really was your father that helped me with my relationship with ARP. I mean, he was the one that convinced David, you know, to Okay, let's give him a chance, uh, so I mean, I have that strong connection with him because of that.
That's the type of guy he was. That's one of the reasons I started the foundation. He was the person who would lend people instruments without them having any kind of reputation, or give them instruments, or
Yeah.
and I've heard the story time and time again. Uh, even a few weeks ago, someone sent me an email about a story like that, and the idea of giving back is, I think, is so important in this life. And we have a project called ARPS for All. I'm not sure if you know about it. We are creating a collection of my father's instruments that, in coordination with a not-for-profit recording complex. It's a place where you can, it's a recording studio, it's a rehearsal studio, it's a community center, more or less, in Boston. And you can go in and rent space for as low as $10, because the whole idea is to make it accessible. And if you don't have money, they'll work it out, that kind of thing.
Oh,
And
oh,
and we want to have grants and artist in residencies, so someone can come in and have, spend a couple of weeks using the synthesizers, using, the rarities. They've become so expensive now because they're so desirable. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this symposium, is to raise money for that project. So and I think that this is something that he would have really liked, because I think he would be very, very upset to see that people are paying tens and tens of thousands of dollars for some of these instruments. And you say, well, why
oh.
not just buy a Korg, and it's a new one and it has a MIDI, and it's another step above. That would have been his attitude. So we're just trying to make things accessible, trying to make it, and he gave you a chance, and look what's happened. And he that's who he was. That's amazing.
That's great.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you for sharing that. That's
yeah.
huge for me. Oh, wow. I've seen some pictures of you with 2600s, but I don't see a lot of liner notes in the earlier Head on Disc records, but it does seem to me that you did use them later on in the studio. Can you tell me a little bit about the usage of the 2600?
Well, when Patrick Gleason came on the road with the Mwandishi band, uh, the ARP 2600 had just come out, and that made it possible for him. Otherwise, he can't carry a huge modular synthesizer on the road to play jazz clubs.
Right?
And there were some concerts too.
Yeah.
I mean, it was difficult enough because, I mean, it was modular, but in a handy package. You could, like a suitcase almost, right? And that was when I learned the most about synthesizers from Patrick before I actually embarked on trying to play them myself. Uh, and so he was able to get one from ARP, the 2600. I don't know if Patrick paid for it or not. I don't remember.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure he did. And he was a studio owner, but he may have gotten a discount. I wouldn't be surprised. Um, and so when I was trying to learn how synthesizers worked, it was always after sound checks. I would go over to Patrick and say, how did you get this sound? Or what does that do? And ask him a lot of questions. And I picked up on that. And then in 1973, when I recorded my first record, which was for Columbia Records, which was really a top label at that time, which is now Sony. Anyway, Miles Davis was on Columbia.
Hmm.
And so I had been on Warner Brothers and then moved to Columbia and uh, did my first recording, my first album there, and it was the Mwandishi band. I didn't play synthesizers, but Patrick Gleason did for that record. And and then when I disbanded the Mwandishi band, I decided, I've been listening to Sly Stone and James Brown a lot, and it kind of takes me back to my roots in Chicago because Chicago's a blues town.
Yep,
I
yep.
said, I want to do something that's a little more earthy, a little more, funkier stuff. And then I broke that band up and I only took one person from that band. And that was Benny Maupin, who played all the reed instruments. And picked all new players. And then that's when I decided, okay, let me try my hand at synthesizers. And that's when I got the ARP Odyssey, And then I used the 2600 rarely because I didn't I didn't know all the ins and outs of it. And it was a lot more complicated in a sense than the Odyssey. And that's probably why you don't see a lot of pictures of me with the 2600.
There was one concert though. This is one of my favorite videos. I believe it's in 1974, and there was a Shekere in it.
Yeah, Chicory.
And
Yeah.
I love Latin music, so it's a
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, Bill Summers played that in my
yeah,
band.
I think so. The video starts with there's some. It sounds like African music or
Hmm.
Afro-Caribbean, and then there's the Shekere, and then you come in really sort of slowly, and I'm just visualizing it, but I could have sworn that there was a 2600 on stage at that concert.
Probably because
I didn't see you play it, but I did see it there. But you had several different keyboards around you, and maybe it was 75. I'm not sure. 90, and you're doing things here and things there and things there, and yeah. So that I have that visualization of the 2600 there. So I didn't know if you actually brought it on stage. I mean, it was not so much a stage instrument as always. The only person I know that took it on stage regularly was Joe Zawinul, I think.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was difficult because you have to use patch cords to connect things. Whereas with the Odyssey, there were no patch cords. There were just faders, sliders, up and down or across. And um, you could get uh, sounds immediately. Whereas with the 2600, not necessarily immediately, unless you do something, you have to put something together. And of course, it had faders too, sliders. Um, but it was more complicated than in a sense than the Odyssey. But it had more possibilities for of a greater variety of sounds. Um, and at that time, you couldn't save your sounds.
No
And
MIDI. No
yeah, there
MIDI.
was no memory, nothing to store memory on, right? So everything had to be done from scratch. That was the early days. I mean, kids today have no idea what that was like.
But it seems that they want to know what it's like. There's a huge resurgence in interest in
Mm.
analogs, and I was actually going to ask you what you think about that. What does it have to offer an emerging musician when there's so much, digital presets and all that? What do you think it has to offer?
I think it connects them with they, they feel a need to connect to the past the way we all do. You know, today is the day after yesterday. It's not just sitting alone. You don't wake up in the morning and and all of a sudden, oh, this is called a day. No, it's the day after yesterday. And a lot of things, because of the advent of technology at this time, um, you can just push some things around and get some sounds without knowing anything. Um, a lot of people make hit records without having any idea of the instrument that they made the record with or made the sound with, because they're making things easy for anyone to be able to make music, which is a good thing. But the thing that's missing is that connection to the past. And I think young people are feeling that need to connect to that past, which was rich with people being able to make sounds, different kinds of sounds, without ease, without the kind of ease that they have today. And look what they did with it. So many great records in the past had synthesizers on them, and those. I mean, that was the original form. That was the original sound,
Hmm.
and I think that's something. There's a need in the human spirit to connect with with one's origin in a way,
Uh-huh.
in a manner of speak. And this origin of the art form itself, of music. You know, it's not built out of nothing. It's built out of what happened in the past, and the dues that people paid in the past in order for it to be what it is today.
That's a new take on that. I really like that. That's great.
Yeah, it has to do with our humanity.
Hmm.
You know, By the way, because of my Buddhism, I redefined myself because I've been playing piano since I was 7. So it's something that's sort of in my DNA. I'm comfortable around keyboards, right? Um, but I also realized that and I found this out while I was chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That's what we chant in SGI, the Buddhist organization I belong to, Soka Gakkai International. Anyway, um, I was chanting one day and kind of thinking about music and stuff because your mind sometimes goes off and goes where it goes. Then I started thinking about my wife and my daughter, and I realized to them, I'm a husband and a father, right? Yes, I play music, but I'm my wife's husband and I'm my daughter's father. I'm also a son, and I'm also a friend and a neighbor and a cousin. I'm an American, an African American. I'm a citizen of the world. All of those different things are aspects of who I am. It's not being a musician doesn't connect them together. It's one of those things. There's only one thing that connects them together. It's that I'm a human being, just like everybody else. That was, I mean, truly a defining moment because I had to redefine myself. So I play music, but what I am is a human being. That changed everything because if I've defined myself as a musician, puts me in a box,
Hmm.
all right? If I define myself as a human being, there's no walls.
Possibilities are endless.
Possibilities are endless, and I wind up saying yes to more things now than I used to. Things I would have said, oh, I don't know anything about that, so no, I don't want to do that. Now I say, oh, I don't know much about that, but okay, I'll try it. Because they may be outside of music, and I'll try it. I mean, that's how I became a goodwill ambassador. Somebody suggested it, and I'd never even thought about that. Goodwill ambassador for UNESCO. But I said yes to that, and I was able to. They voted me in, and I started. I introduced International Jazz Day, and now we just finished our 10th or 11th International Jazz Day every year, and that's it's watched by billions of people all over the world. It's huge. If I had said, if I hadn't made that change in the definition of myself,
Mhm.
International Jazz Day would not have happened. So I mean, it's changed my life considerably, thinking that way, and it helps me to understand other human beings who have experiences that I haven't experienced, but because we're human, I can identify with whatever they're going through.
So you can find a commonality.
Yes,
You don't have anything overtly in common or externally in common.
it helped me to understand the value of COVID.
Hmm.
There's a Buddhism says, whatever, uh, um, you know, we have nice things that happen to us, and then we have, difficulties and suffering, right? And Buddhism says instead of looking outside for who to blame for your suffering, first thing you should do is look inside and see what can you learn from this that can help you to move forward in spite of this thing that's trying to push you back. And what COVID, what I learned from that is that is that there's one family on this planet. It's every human being on the planet. We're part of one family, and COVID wants to kill that family. So everybody on the planet is a brother or a sister, or whatever you may want to call yourself. We're all one, basically, and we need to take care of our family, and that is going to lead us to elevating ourselves for the 21st century, this century of technology, because there are many things where all human beings are going to be confronting,
Hmm.
you know, job replacement by robots, all kinds of things. So we need to take care of each other. That's the main point. Anyway, I don't even remember how did I get started talking about that?
I think music is a great connector for that. One of the things that was beautiful that came out of COVID, especially during lockdown, is I have the vivid memories of people starting to do vocal or even orchestral collaborations, through Zoom somehow, or singing, even as far as, in Italy, remember people sitting on their balconies and playing music to each other and singing to each other.
Yeah,
There was a time, my husband and I were walking up the street, and there was a young girl with her mother, and she's playing violin on our street.
that's
And and
beautiful.
and everyone reaching out, and music seemed to be almost this universal glue that was holding us together. Yeah,
Right, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. That was, and and that also, I was just thinking about how people were applauding the first responders. You know,
And
that was
playing for.
fantastic. You know, I never expected to see anything like that. You know, but as you're saying, music was a very important uh, parallel uh, response, um, because music is healing, and it seemed quite evident to me. I mean, that's the proof of it,
Hmm.
right there. I mean, we were we were sort of at our better selves in a way at that
Yes,
time.
yes.
we're not at our better selves right now.
No,
In
no,
America, it looks
it's pretty grim.
things look pretty grim. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, well,
but there's a lot we need to learn about, getting along together, how to make things work for everybody. You know.
I feel like music is one of those things. I mean, music seems to be one of those places that seems to break boundaries, racial, gender, age, people being able to, enjoy each other's music and respect each other's work and enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like musicians are, you're saying you're an official goodwill ambassador, but and that is part of
Mm.
your humanity. But playing music is also that because of the joy, of the everyday joy that people, they turn on or something, they hear something for the first time that ignites their passion, or they hear something that reminds them of their childhood or their first love or something like that. And all that is instigated by music.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's the connection to me being a goodwill ambassador because I'm a musician, right? I mean, that's what I do, right? And
Enjoy
this
your
connection to
music.
the rest of humanity, the rest of the world, International Jazz Day does that because improvisers, improvisation is not limited to jazz musicians. Every human being is an improviser.
Mm.
What's going to happen in the next minute? You don't know until it happens, but you have to respond to it, right? When you wake up in the morning, you don't know whether the sun's going to be shining or whether it's going to be raining or whether there's going to be a hurricane or fires out in California. You don't know what the day is going to be. You don't know what's going to happen moment to moment. We can't see into the future. So what do? We improvise and we learn how to hopefully learn how to improvise better as human beings to
Hmm.
be able to survive in our best form. Uh, so I think this improvisation with jazz is sort of built into the fiber of being a human being. Yes, we do it with notes and with music, but improvisation is not something that's limited to jazz musicians. No, it's part of the human experience.
So you're saying we rip off of each other all the time without even in a way that is.
Yeah, yeah. I thought you said rip off at first. No, you said riff off, riff off. Okay. Yeah, we do. I mean, we have conversation.
Yeah,
Conversation is improvising.
yeah.
We do it all the time. Somebody asks you a question and you have to respond to that. I mean, you don't have to, but I mean, most people will try to give some kind of answer. That's improvisation.
Hmm.
So that's built into our DNA too.
Very cool. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. It's it's that unfortunately classical music kind of gave it away. It used to be part of classical music too.
Really?
Oh yeah. Mozart, Haydn, they were all improvisers.
Hmm.
And I think Chopin was too. But what happened is that eventually with classical music, they decided like a particular person's cadenza for a concerto was like the definitive one and decided, I don't know how it actually happened, uh, um, but it was something like this. And then it was decided that this person's cadenza was going to be the correct one. Then everybody started learning that. And no, and everybody just got away from being able to make their own cadenza for a concerto. It's really a shame. And I have an institute called Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, and one of the things we want to do with one of the programs that we have, which we have at UCLA, and we want to actually help classical musicians learn how to improvise, not necessarily improvise jazz, but learn how to improvise off of a chord structure in a way they see fit. And it's jazz musicians that can help with that effort,
Wow. Very cool.
you know. Anyway, I'm getting away from this talk is supposed to be about art,
It's supposed to be about
but it's about music too. Yes,
it's about music, and it's all, I think it's all relevant because, I'm here because my father invented one of your earliest
absolutely,
synthesizer instruments, and apparently helped you on your way with that, and so
absolutely.
yeah. There's a little clip, actually. I'll send it to you after, of my father speaking about how the synthesizer also gave musicians more options. So if a musician was not necessarily um, accomplished in a certain with a certain instrument, there was more options to them available. So I think that, I find it interesting when I see people whose first instrument was not a keyboard to start to work with synthesizers in general and ARPs in particular. I think that ARPs seem to be easier to use than a lot of the older ones. There's a flowing thought process to the interface. Uh,
Mm.
and I'm wondering also what you think of the reissues that are coming out. Have you tried any of them? I saw a video with you, I think with Korg.
Yeah, I've been connected with Core for many years now. Um, I have a Core Kronos, and I've been using Kronos ever since they started making those. And but I have a ton of keyboards. I've got a Waldorf. Uh, I've got this. I mean, these things are everywhere. There's a Roland Phantom back behind me. Uh, I've got some. I got a whole locker room full of keyboards, and now they're starting to make plugins that are keyboards that are just in the computer, but they have to be triggered by MIDI from an external keyboard. But well, I mean, to get to really work with them, you need an external keyboard to be able to send the MIDI signal to them, and that is something that uh, is huge now because it's almost every day there's some new stuff that comes out, new things for making beats, and it's all within the computer.
It's pretty amazing how much stuff is coming out.
Yeah, and Korg is doing the same thing with their products. There's software versions of them. Yeah.
There's an Odyssey on my iPad right now.
Yeah, see?
That's a lot.
Actually, I think I have that Odyssey on my iPad.
When I was flying to the UK last week, I had my headset on and I was fooling around with it. It was a lot of fun. All right,
Yeah, I
let's
got a
see.
little keyboard that I carry with me in my backpack. Yeah,
So you
yeah,
always
so I
have a
can.
keyboard. You never leave home without a keyboard.
Yeah, right. Our Odyssey was the first synthesizer that I felt I could have the possibility of opening that doorway with the ARP Odyssey. Uh, the tone of the instrument, there was a certain kind of richness to it. It didn't sound cheap. It was just definitive. Um, it wasn't wobbly. It wasn't wobbly. It had a strong sound, but that didn't necessarily overpower you, unless you wanted it to. And then you'd have to program that in. Um, Great flexibility, and without the ARP Odyssey, I wouldn't have been able to make Headhunters. And there are kids today that weren't even born when I made that record that know that record because I've been touring lately, and a lot of young people who were born actually in the 21st century that know that record. And so they know the ARP Odyssey because, you know, I made the melody of along with the I don't know if it was alto sax or a stritch or whatever instrument Benny Maupin played. And they played that melody with him on the ARP Odyssey. So it's still here. It's still here after 50 years.